Brand is not what you say, is what the customer says. So a lot of people go, well, you know, our logo is the brand. That's not so. It's ultimately the customers of how they perceive your product and service and how it impacts their heart and how it impacts their intellect, but how is that being shared? So it's an experience and emotional connection, and it increases the value equity, and it builds trust and loyalty, and attracts consumers local to global. So what is branding? Ultimately, it is a process. And it's a process between strategy, and it's a process between implementation, and it's a process about managing a brand. And it's about creating that alignment between your brand value and touch point. And a touch point is everything that communicates and synthesizes the brand. So that could be the name of the company, the colors that are used, the packaging, the person who answers the phone. Everything that's a contact point is an opportunity to produce sales. So it is the smartest and most powerful language used today, and it does involve all stakeholders. So when do you start branding? When there's a new concept, when you have a new business, you have a new product or service. You want to gain more market share for higher profits, customers, and partners. And when the identity itself is fragmented, like let's say the logo, the brochure, there isn't a consistency, your brand identity is outdated, meaning it's not like, let's say it's 20th century looking, but it's not 21st century thinking. And you have new lines and extensions for your brand idea. So really what we're going to go over is strategies for the 21st century, implementation of your brand, and then examples of thriving brands. So strategies for the 21st century, it's really about differentiation, and it's really about going beyond the clutter, because there's more products and services than ever before in the market space. The question becomes, how are you going to not only stand out, but actually differentiate? It's about, you know, what is going to be unique about your product, your intellectual property. So a lot of times people might have an idea, but it really depends on their intellectual property. It's how secure is their trade secrets, how you patent your ideas. Is it actually buildable where it's actually worth more than what's on the balance sheet? So like Coca-Cola, for example, they're worth like $40 billion, but the brand name in that Coke bottle and their script and the elements that make up the attribute for their brand is what gives them so much value, recognizable value in the world. So a lot of people, when they're starting off and they're thinking about their product, they're not looking at it from the standpoint of really how to build a big brand where it really ties in a lot of mind share and ties into the heart of consumers. So if you go to another country, that country starts to recognize who you are just maybe by the symbol, meaning like the Nike swoosh, for example. And to give you an idea, a shortcut of this idea is, let's say, you know, you wanted to buy, let's say someone here owns Nike and they wanted to sell it to me, and they said, you know what, you could have all the distribution, you could have all the channels, you could have all the inventory, but we're not going to give you the name or the swoosh. That is part of the brand identity that's worth so much more than the product or service itself. So you got to think about it. It goes beyond the product and service, and it's really about building something that has so much more value that the consumer can feel, and to become loyal to that product. So it's about aspiration. Now it's about aspiration more than anything. It's like, how are you going to inspire and aspire the consumer so they could feel part of something? So it's science, creativity, and high ROI, meaning return on investment. So really what it boils down to, what I think about branding now and really looking at businesses and their ideas, it's about whole brain thinking. It's really about the rational elements, about the left-hand side of the brain and the business side, the structure, but the right side is equally, if not more important, to engage the consumer. So when it comes to product, for example, a lot of it's based on the product design. And a lot of companies don't place enough emphasis on the product design. So if you look at Apple, for example, they place a lot of emphasis on their product design, which is based on a minimalist. So then they start carrying a theme through each of their products. So when they come out with a new product, it fits into a family. So there's a sense of style behind it. By the way, that gives rise beyond price because now it's based on value. So the more that you emphasize what's making you unique through communicating it, through the aesthetics of your product or the packaging, the more it's going to be worth more to the consumer. So one of the biggest things is brand promise, is looking at what can you promise the consumer so the consumer really understands what is it that's differentiating you from all the rest. So a quick example would be like FedEx. When FedEx came out, really it was about their biggest competitor was the post office. Well, the post office couldn't deliver absolutely guaranteed overnight delivery of a package. So FedEx, that was really their overall brand promise. And a brand promise is really the DNA to your overall position of your brand. Something that you could always rely on, that differentiate you and you could count on, that's different from everybody else. And it actually should be pretty scary. Like, when you're coming up with your business idea, ultimately your business idea from the standpoint of the brand promise should be something where you just go, wow, that's a big undertaking, but we can do it. Okay? So a lot of their brand promise is based on their intellect, of the processes of how they do things, FedEx, from the standpoint of their systems. Okay? So can a business deliver on its promise again and again? So let's say with Avis, we try harder. So they knew that Hertz was number one, so Avis had to think creatively and differently about their product or their service, for that matter, and go, what can we do differently? Well, it was about customer service. So that we said, well, why don't we figure out something that would be really a specific promise that turns out to be their tagline. Avis, we try harder. When they start using that tagline, by the way, and demonstrate it on their product, that's when they started to create the customer trust that a lot of the Hertz went over to Avis, and then Avis the next year became number one. And now they still keep that position. Okay, so here again, branding goes beyond the product, it goes beyond the service, it goes beyond the benefits. It's about the aspiration from the consumer's perspective. And that's really key nowadays. The reason why it's so key is because we're information rich and time poor. And when we're shopping, we rely on things that really resonate with us emotionally first, and then we engage on the left side of the brain, which is the intellect. So there's the science and psychology, and when you put the two together, that's what gives a brand its edge, such as Virgin or Apple Computer, like it's mentioned, or Coca-Cola. So these things can be applied for any size business. That's the great thing about this. So implementing your identity, touch points. A touch point here again is everything that communicates the brand. That means the email, the website, the brochure. The one thing that most companies do, like 99% of the companies I visit, when I call it what's called a brand audit, they actually don't have a consistency between all their elements. Like they have one company design their website, another company design a brochure. So everything is splintered and nothing's telling one story. Well, the problem is that the consumer starts to think that you're multiple companies and trying to figure out who you are. So you see that becomes a barrier between you and what you have to offer. So all touch points need to speak one consistent voice and tell one consistent story. If you're not telling one consistent story, then it's what I call the Sybil effect. You're sending out all these messages, but none of them are landing ultimately of who you are. But a lot of companies, to start off with why they do that, because themselves are not clear of who they are. Like what's their vision, what's their philosophy, what's their position, what makes them different, what's their intellectual property. All these things have merit when it comes to building a brand for long term. Most companies are thinking from the standpoint of short term, and they go, we just need to get this product out. Well, that's great, but even if you got in a big retail space, the next thing that the question's going to be asked from the buyers, what's next? What's your next line? And if you haven't thought about your brand, then basically you shot yourself in the foot before you even started. Okay? So I'm just speaking of what I see out there and the natural patterns of problems that companies face. So just to give you an idea, the Sybil effect is, let's just say that this is your idea. So it's this shape, this color, this texture. So you figured out your brand core, which is about quality, it's your position, it's your value, it's position, philosophy. And these are your channels, right? And let's say this is your website, the blue shape, and then this is your package design. Let's say it's a product that you're bringing to the shelf. And everything else is our other touch points, here again, to communicate your brand. But see how nothing matches in to even define of who you are as a company, as a brand? That's where the real problem starts, is what is your DNA, okay? So a lot of times people just think of their product, but that itself is not enough to create a brand for long term. So you're worth more to the consumer and all your stakeholders and all your shareholders. So if you're looking at getting investors involved, this is a sure way to really diffuse and dilute the funds really quick. The capital, diluting the capital really quickly is when you're not clear of your overall strategy and definition of who you are as a brand. So let's just use that same example. Here is where you are very clear about who you are, your core brand position, and you're using the same channels. Now all your touch points are lined up, like the same colors, same tonality. The copywriting itself has the same tone, like is it humorous, is it funny, is it light or is it heavy, is it intellectual? All those things make a difference when you're laying out your website, when you're laying out your brochure. The big question is it consistent to tell one complete story? So what happens is that the consumer makes a direct connection to who you are. And with that direct connection, the payoff is more effective use of your capital. There's a more effective use of your media. By the way, when you're not set up from the standpoint of your core brand before you start utilizing which media, then you're basically going to send out the wrong signal as well. So like a lot of times they'll say, oh, let's do PR or let's create marketing. But and those are really important, what are called to create brand awareness. But if you're not clear of who you are and what's making you difference before you do that, here again, you're going to be wasting a lot of dollars of basically paying companies to create your media, but without telling that one story. So that one story really needs to be created first. So this gives you an idea there's a lot of people that are not clear about what a branding firm is and how it differs. But just to give you an idea of what a true branding firm is where they could really look at and come up with a strategy, and then they could execute. But it could be done where everything is integrated under one roof, or for the most part, I should say, for the identity. So the direct mailing, the storytelling, the newsletters, and the print, the advertising. So now everything is orchestrated. And that basically creates it where it's a tighter, here again, identity for the business. Okay? So just giving you what a real true branding firm looks like is that they handle the advertising and design. A lot of people go, oh, well, there's a design company say you do branding. What the limitation is that they're not doing a full scope of what's possible with branding within the standpoint of media. So what happens is that the client has the idea and they're working specifically with the branding firm. So just to give you an idea of real brand examples, this is a company that had an idea of bringing picnics back, but their idea was basically a picnic basket. But they really weren't clear about the cost, the manufacturing, the distribution, and how to even develop a brand, so it really stood out from what is typical. So what they had was what is considered more typical. And so the first thing is to figure out from the strategy what kind of name would be more of an aspiration and what kind of mark would be more inspiring as well. We decided that they would want to be geared towards high-end marketplace, so the previous image showed more low-end. So the typography, the colors, everything about this really spoke in a tonality of who they wanted to reach and what kind of price point they want to yield from their product. So the product wasn't developed well enough because it was just basically a basket. So it was taking place of what was out there, which basically were the hot and cold bags, but the hot and cold bags were all typical. They were pretty bland. So it was about an aspiration in developing packages that were more customized. Because right now what's taking place, it's all about the customer behavior and it's about personalization and customization. So if your idea, you got to think about it. What can you do to customize and personalize it to the consumer? It's all about the consumer, and it's all about building them in a point that they go, well, I got to have this because I can relate to this, and actually this is something that inspires me. Okay? So it's no longer about commodity. It is about benefit and attributes and features, but it goes way beyond that now. I'm talking about what's currently going on and what's going to stay here because of all the different medias, and there's so many products that are out there. So what we came up with is all these different ideas like just for you, just desserts. And it was all personalized. And the packaging itself we found is product in a different country that keeps food hot and cold up to 3 hours. And this is all stackable, and the price point was right. You know, because she started off with a product that would have cost like $7 versus just like, you know, a dollar per bag. And it had reusable factors in it that took advantage of today when it comes to reusable products, materials. So by doing this in a sequence, there's a whole sequence to this, then it was looking at, well, how are you going to get investors involved, or how are you going to get partners involved? So it's about telling story. So it's about, you know, we created this color schematic that really worked with the packaging of the bags and the brochures. And it was all about co-branding. The co-branding opportunity in this case was Audrey Hepburn Foundation. And they really bought into it. They actually ended up partnering with them because it spoke value to what they had to offer, the Audrey Hepburn Foundation. So really it's about the brochures and the display, like displays, how it's going to work in the stores, and how they plan to sell their product with the co-branding. Because right now, if you have an idea and you want to get out there fast, it's about working with a network that exists already, which means a lot of time is co-branding, taking your idea and taking your product and branding with something that's out there already, that has distribution already, that has the channels in place. But your vision and your philosophy has to match that of who you want to co-brand with, okay? And your values, by the way, as well. So then it shows and displays the products. And then it talks about the team. So a lot of times when it comes to being effective with your brand, it's understanding who is on the team. And this is here again, when it comes to stakeholders, investors, they're all about who's on your team. So it's really important that you pick your team carefully, very carefully. So then it goes into the trade show. When it comes to the website, we determined that the website is not geared towards the end user, the consumer, but it was about partnerships. It was about sales reps. So it was a very interactive website that really demonstrated who and why Perfectly Expressed was important in the industry. And then this is the actual display of how it all tied together from a trade show standpoint. So now it's all put together in a way that now you could track the right customers. A lot of people, they go out there and they just build a trade show, but they're not clear of their story here again and what's going to differentiate them. And so in this case, they had a lot of reps that signed up with them during the time that we created the trade show, and they were out in the trade industry. And just to show you another example was Standard in the medical industry. They were creating products that were all custom products, but their old identity, this is called what I call logo, it didn't differentiate them from the rest of the pack. Like, this person looked like he's having a problem getting out of the chair. He's he's basically didn't have any arms. So it was really working against them, and it was outdated, but it didn't differentiate themselves from the big boys on the shelf. So they're having a problem in the wholesale space, and they're having problems of selling and closing their ideas to buyers in the wholesale space. So by doing a strategy session, we figured out with their product that are beautifully designed and keeping within the price point, we want to create an aspirational brand, a brand that really aspires the wholesalers, the buyers, and of course the consumers. So we did something that was really unique. First of all, we changed our name because they didn't own Standards.com. Another company did, and they owned Standard.com. And then we created something that was more of an aspiration from the standpoint of colors. For example, most people, what it is equipment that assists the elderlies, like handrails and wheelchairs and canes and walkers. And they're beautifully designed, so it's geared towards the baby boomers. versus World War II vets. There's basically 5 generations, right? And we wanted to create something that was an aspiration, and we created warm colors. These warm colors, really what people will retire is in warm areas, like the Caribbeans or Mexico or Hawaii or Palm Springs. So the whole idea was aspiration, and then came up with a tagline, live the longer life you love. So the whole thing started to take on a feeling that goes, wow, this brand speaks to me, or it really will speak to me in my lifestyle that's for my golden years. So this is the old packaging, okay? So this is here again a touch point. That mark is a touch point. The tagline's a touch point. So their old packaging really showed really an elderly gentleman trying and forcing himself out of bed. It's not aspiration. It reminds the person of his problems. So this is really where it worked against the brand, okay? And, you know, it's not contemporary. One of their core values, there's usually 5 values that come out of a strategy session, and one of theirs is innovation. Does this speak innovation to you guys? Okay, so the whole idea is that this looked very outdated, and it was a wrong use of their messaging and the wrong use of a layout for a package. So here, this is more of the aspiration. Okay, live the longer life you love, and it's about happy people. That it's the idea of after they're using the product, they basically improve the lifestyle of these individuals because now they have a product that actually assists them in a proper way. You see the difference here? So, and they've been number 1, for example, for safety and function, and nobody even knew that as well. So it's taking the best parts of who they are, and what differentiated them was, here again, quality product at a reasonable price. So, and then this is really their end cap piece, and here again it really was really busy, and it didn't communicate their value proposition of what differentiated them in a market space. And so you could see here where really we used the warm colors that were a lot more inviting and did unusual shapes that differentiate other point-of-purchase displays or end caps, for that matter, at the wholesale level. And then this is their website. So the website here again was outdated, and it really didn't illustrate the value. This, when we redid their website by animating how to use the product, they used to use those animations to their presentations rather than hauling in all the products. And by doing that, they had a 100% close rate on the wholesale space, where before they were averaging about 15% or so. So it's all about your presentation. It's all about the brand of what it's going to speak to your consumer. And I'm not here again talking about the end consumer. It could be a lot of times the partners of who you want to partner with. And so basically after 7 months, we got them in all these retail spaces, which is really fast. But they had a great sales team, and they got someone that was really good with operations as well. But we basically created the identity to get them into these spaces very quickly. But we first wanted to master the wholesale space, then master retail, and then it's mastering the web space. So we figured out 3 lines of distribution channels for them where they had 1 originally. So basically the sales, we grew them 32% in 12 months and landed them new accounts in mass market with a 100% close rate, and a much stronger brand presence and multiple revenue streams in a retail space and on the web. Just to give you another example here is showing you I want to show you real life current stuff that that how branding really is applicable. So the first thing is figuring out what is your DNA to your business. So what I hear again when it comes to branding, I look at the left and the right hand hemisphere of the brain. So really, what is the business and what is the brand? What kind of business are you in? Why should people care? And what can you promise them? And how can you differentiate? Okay? One of the biggest things is differentiation, and you got to illustrate that very quickly, here again through your touch points, through your brand identity. Okay? So what I like to do is look at the business strategy. What is your strategy to getting out there? Is it going to be licensing? Is it going to be franchising? Is it going to be working in the wholesale space, retail space? What channels are you taking? What media? A lot of companies don't know what to take first, and what happens is you end up spending a lot of money trying to figure that out. So I always say, well, why don't we start with a strategy to really look at what would be makes the most sense of the quickest quantum leap into your market space, and then figure out what would yield the next product that would be rolled out. So the second component of this is understanding the consumer. So this is how I broke it down. I mean, this is years, 25 years of working from Disney to DreamWorks to Apple to Honda to startup companies to solopreneurs to inventors, and figuring out what's missing out there. So this is what's missing out there. It's not a strong enough master plan, not enough strong enough master overview before even going out to the market space. Here again, understand your business, which is basically how you're going to be profitable. The consumer is what is the psychology, what is their learning behaviors. The brand is what is the overall identity that you want to create for your business so people can actually be loyal to it. And how are they going to experience your brand? Okay, all three of these pieces need to fit together. So this is just going to give you another example. So WSS is what's called Warehouse Shoe Sale. They have 52 stores. When I met them, they were basically in a decrease of this new economy, and they're losing sales. They've been around for 25 years, but they didn't know, and they're footwear. So they have 52 stores. They sell over 3,000 styles a day. They're bigger than any other company that's out there in the footwear, but nobody knows who they are. And they were serving the lower income community for the last 25 years, but they didn't have disposable income. So over the years, they've been losing on the average of 10 to 15%, and that was costing them quite a bit. So just gave you an idea of how they were branding themselves through their identity. So this is their, advertising. This is their truck vehicle design. This is their billboards. Now, they had a real problem with their billboards, by the way, because Nike, basically very few companies can work with Nike and Air Jordan. They actually built this relationship. But Air Jordan and Nike had a real problem working with them because they look cheap, where Air Jordan and Nike is really a high-end label, right? So it's a disjoint. And so it's really hard for them to do business with them. And this is their store, a lot of their storefronts. Okay, it worked great in the past, but it doesn't work great in the future or currently. And this is the inside of the stores where it was all checkered and so forth. So the gentleman came from a swap meet attitude because that's where he started his business, but he kept that same identity as he was growing, but he was realizing he was losing a lot of sales to the Nike stores, to the Puma stores, and to Foot Locker and Zappos, okay? So we're looking at, well, what can we do? So what we had to start with was a strategy to figure out their overall position, their vision, their philosophy, what kind of promise they're going to deliver, and what were going to be the differentiation qualities that nobody else can copy. And I mean copy, meaning Zappos, I mean Nike, I mean Puma, I mean all the big stores, right? So after going through a 3-day strategy session with 9 VPs and the president, this is called mood boards, is to figure out what kind of mood do we want to create for the consumer? Who is our consumer? What are going to be the 5 values that we can hang our hats on, like innovation, quality, okay? And one other idea is one of the values is actually being cool. So we started off with, well, the major touch point that then yield the most value for them is, they call the logo, I call a brand mark if it's done right. So this was their logo. So it said WSS, and they had limitation of footwear, and that became a big issue if they're looking at apparel. So what happens is that you got WSS trying to brand themselves with continue doing kind of the same thing they did in the past. And then what we looked at is how you're going to really differentiate from the standpoint of shapes and color, but keep the red. We want to keep the red, and we want to keep WSS because it was known. We landed on a particular mark, and then we started to define what kind of type do we want to use to really tell that story. And so we ended with this mark that was very unusual, and we had to really make it different from their 3,000 vendors, as well as Zappos and all the big retail, big box retail, and create a mark that really separated from them. but also create a tagline, shoe style and selection that really resonate of who they are based on their overall position. So this is what's called the brand mark, which is the first part of the brand identity. Here itself, it's not a brand in itself. Here again, it's about the consumer's experience, what they're going to feel as we promise them into the retail space. So then we control the colors through the silver and the red and the blue. And then we came up with this whole strategy of everything for their entire store, the customers, all the architects for the building, how we're going to rebrand everything. And all their signage to keep it all consistent. And really work through all the different types of elevations that they had to offer. So it's going through different phases. Basically, we took them through 4 different phases, from the end caps to the cash wraps, looking at the murals of creating a story to their advertising, looking at the interiors, looking at the store displays, looking at everything that had to do with the brand, all the touch points. So basically, there was a couple hundred touch points we had to look at. Even the lighting was really critical. What kind of lighting, what kind of mood do we want to create? What kind of music do we want to create for the brand? What kind of wall units were important to us, the floor fixtures, the light fixtures. And then we came up with 3D models of what could be used in the space in the stores using the end caps. And then create a whole identity system. So this is the old exterior of the store, just showing you. And then what happened is that we redesigned the whole exterior. And by doing this exterior and rebranding their trucks, this is the old and this is the new. And now it's the old billboard and this is the new billboard. And then that's the old stores and the new stores. And this is the old website and the new website. By rebranding all their image, then we increased them by 200% in 7 months. And our website, we grew them by 1,929.6%. And then we grew them another 253% the following year, this year basically, over last year. So the reason why I'm just showing you these examples is because really the brand makes the biggest difference for your products and service. So thank you for being here.